it's Ichi here, and today I am back with episode 9 of the Tangerine Knits podcast. For today, I have 2 finished objects. Both are garments, in fact, fingering weight garments, so that is where a lot of my knitting efforts went into over the past couple of weeks. I also have a number of whips. I have 4 whips still that I can share, and then a few acquisitions. And so with that, we will hop right in to my first finished object, which is this modified Casia square neck by Refined Knitwear. I knitted this using the Plucky knitter Primo fingering yarn, which is 75% superwash merino, 20% cashmere, and 5% nylon. I was just checking my notes there. The key features of this pattern is, I think, this square neck that has an I-cord bind off, and then one of my favorite features, this puffed sleeve. That's pretty subtle, but you can still kind of see it, and I really like that. Actually, yesterday I was out and about because my partner's mom joined their community chorus, and they had a show. And afterwards, we went to get dinner, and there was a lady who was in line behind me who asked if I knitted my sweater, and I was impressed that she could tell that this is a hand knitted sweater, and I said yes, and she said that she really likes the puff sleeve detail as well, so I definitely appreciated that. The pattern originally calls for long sleeves that end with a ribbed cuff, but I didn't have enough yarn for that, and I knew that I wouldn't, so I ended up doing short sleeves. I did originally try to go for sleeves that went to my, just above my elbows, but I ended up not having quite enough yarn for that either. And also I felt like, because this top is a little bit cropped, again due to yarn skein limitations, I felt like having elbow length sleeves was just a little bit top heavy for this top. And yeah, I think ideally I would have loved for this to be long sleeves. I think that would look so classic in this rich purple color, but alas, we only had enough for short sleeves. And I'm a little bit on the fence about whether I wish this was even shorter. In my previous version that I knitted shorter sleeves, maybe an inch or so shorter, and I remember afterwards thinking I should have knitted it just a little bit longer. So this time I did, and of course now that I've knitted it longer, I'm thinking, well, maybe I should have knitted it a bit shorter. So I'm not sure if that's just primacy bias towards the first version that I knit and being used to this having short sleeves, but anyway, I think I'm just going to let this be and see if eventually I want to fix it. I think that would be relatively easy to fix, to frog back the sleeves and make it shorter. For now, I'm just leaving it as is. I've worn this twice so far already since casting it off maybe 2 weeks ago. And yeah, I mean, it's fine. I think I can't really see it when I'm wearing it. And so I don't really know if I prefer the sleeves this length or a little bit shorter. But for now, I think it'll work just fine. So this is the second time I'm knitting this pattern, and the previous one I knit using Drops brushed alpaca silk, which is a fluffy yarn. The pattern originally calls for 2 strands of mohair, so that's why I went with that to begin with, although I held that Drop brushed alpaca silk single-stranded, so it was pretty off gauge, and this one, as you can probably expect, is also pretty off gauge. I think I sized up 2 sizes in order to get a garment with no ease based on my bust measurements. Regarding the knitting process, in my last video, I think I'd already started the body. And so, yeah, since then I've just knitted stockinette for the body and then finished with the ribbing. I did continue to alternate skeins because this is a hand-dyed yarn and I didn't want to have any color pooling. I shared in my previous video that the way I did helical knitting was the method that I saw on this Brooklyn Tweed tutorial and also on Knitty Natty, where you basically knit up until three stitches before the working yarn of the other skein, and then you slip 3 stitches, and then you pick up the other working yarn and keep knitting, etc. And using this method, I had shared that my beginning of round shifts because you're slipping 3 stitches each time. And then somebody had commented and shared that shouldn't happen in their experience. And I am new to helical knitting, so I'm definitely open to advice here. But basically, after I saw that comment, I was kind of trying to figure out if I was doing something that is not correct. So I did a little bit more research, and I'm not sure if it's due to semantics when I was saying this beginning of round changes, or whether it's that other people use different methods to alternate skeins. So the semantics thing is because I know some tutorials will say that, when you have your beginning of round, let's say it's like on the left side of your work, you just keep a stitch marker there and that beginning of round stays, but your working yarn just shifts as you slip stitches every time you alternate skeins. And so in that sense, the beginning of round, if you say that's just where the piece began, then it does not change. But like if your beginning of round is where your working yarn is, then that does shift. So at least that's what I had gathered from those tutorials, and that's what my experience was. But I did note that there's another method that people use to alternate skeins in which you don't slip the 3 stitches. You simply just pick up the other strand and then keep knitting. I think there's something you have to keep in mind about being consistent about which strand you keep in the front versus the back. And I can't remember which one it is, because I've only tried that a couple of times, and I found that it was a little bit more difficult for me to keep tension even when I was not doing the slip 3 stitches, whereas when I do the slip 3 stitches thing, it was very, very easy to keep the tension even. So that's the way that I went with. So yeah, I think the reason I had shared the shifting of the beginning of round was that I had to do a little bit of finagling when the slip stitches came to the raglan, because I'm supposed to increase every other round to get the raglan to increase. But, eventually at some point, because I was slipping stitches every time, at some point I had to slip 3 stitches for my raglan. And so because of that, like my beginning of round, I felt that it had shifted because I had to be knitting, like the first increase raglan shifted by 1 because I had to slip 3 and basically miss increase on that one, if that makes sense. So yeah, open to comments there. Again, like that was my first time trying helical knitting, so this is definitely a learning experience. I think it ended up working out just fine. But if you have a favorite method for doing alternating skeins, whether it's helical knitting or not, I'd love to hear it. And any other tips or watch outs that you have, I'd appreciate that as well. But overall, I don't really see any color pooling. I think there are some stripes. I think last time I was a little bit unsure about having, basically I'm new to hand-dyed yarn as well, at least in terms of a garment. So I was just getting used to like all the dimension that's there. And now that I've worn it a couple of times, I do appreciate that a lot, especially for a tonal like this. It is a really, really beautiful fabric. So I really like the way that it turned out. And on that topic, I'll speak a little bit more about the fabric. So this is, again, 75% merino and 20% cashmere, 5% nylon. And it just feels amazing. It is super soft. There's absolutely no itch factor. It's a pretty thin fabric, so it's really, really comfortable. I think perfect for spring weather, even though I know this is not the springiest fabric. I would love to use a fabric with content like this again. I feel like this is probably more commonly used for shawls, this like superwash merino plus cashmere plus nylon blend, but I would be happy to make another garment, another tee, another long sleeve top, something like that. Would definitely be looking out for it. So overall, I think this was a pretty successful project, and I'm really happy with it. I think because of how comfortable it is, I will keep reaching for it. And to style it, I've styled it with light colored jeans and also white jeans. I think those go pretty well, and I think with black jeans it would work just fine too, but that might be a little bit dark, so I might gravitate towards that a little bit more when it's like fall or winter or something like that. So yep, that is my Casia square neck. All right, and my second finished object is my twisted loop top by Otherloops. I casted this on, I think, beginning of March, and now it's the first week of May, so it took me like, I guess, a month and a half or so to knit this. In my last video, I had joined in the round already, so I was knitting the body, and yeah, since then there's not like too many new things technique-wise to share because there's just a lot of knitting in the body. And there's that lace motif that you do every couple of rows. And in the end, I think the cabling, oh, did I say lace? I meant to say cabling. In the end, the cabling actually didn't take that much effort because, there are only a couple of cabled sections. There's only like 1 or 2 cables every time. And so basically there wasn't that much cabling that I had to worry about. I just kind of had to count rows so I know when to do the cabling rows. And the way I kept track of that is I just kept stitch markers. I put in removable stitch markers to mark the rows in increments of I basically put in stitch markers to denote like different intervals, and so I can easily count, where did I do my last cable and then how many rows, so I can count how many rows I need to knit before I can do the next cable section. I knitted this using a yarn called Tropical Lane Ideale. It is 100% non-superwash merino in a fingering weight. I also found this in the clearance bin at my local knitting store, and I think I originally got this to make winter accessories or something like that. I bought 5 balls thinking I could make like a couple of hats and maybe some gloves or scarves or something like that, but I ended up deciding to use it for a top. I haven't heard much about this yarn, but when I looked into it, it sounded like it was an Italian yarn that's advertised as wool with the softness of cashmere. And I will say, after it blocks especially, it becomes really, really soft. I guess I haven't had a lot of fingering weight merino non-superwash garments that I can compare this to, but I can say that it feels extremely soft. There is no itch factor, and I'm someone who I think has sensitive skin, so I'm very happy with the fabric that I chose. In fact, I'm kind of interested to go back to my yarn store and see if they have any more of this in different colors. I got this yarn back in January, but I last went back to the yarn store maybe like April or late March or something, and they still had a ton of colors in this. It didn't seem to be super popular. I mean, it was already in clearance and people weren't really buying it, so I'm very happy with the fabric that I chose. Again, this is wool, so I don't think this would be, I think of this as more of a transitional sleeveless top rather than like a summer camisole or anything. I live in Virginia, so it's definitely way too hot and humid in the summer to wear wool, but I think in the spring, having this with or without like a light cardigan or a light jacket, I think would be really nice. Let's see. A little bit about modifications. So for the collar, the pattern calls for a double folded collar, and that's what I did knit at first, but it just felt so thick to me. 2 layers of wool, especially in rib, and especially before it's blocked. I mean, after it blocks, I think the whole thing feels a little bit thinner, but it just felt so thick when I put it on. I don't know, something about the thickness made me feel like it doesn't fit with this top for me, and so I ended up just knitting, I frogged it back, and I just knitted 2 rows of double knitting. I did a tubular bind off, that's what I'm trying to say. I did a tubular bind off, so you can see here, it's, I did, 4 setup rounds, so, knit 1, slip 1, purl 1, and then do that again for a total of 4 setup rounds, so it's extra puffy. I think sometimes patterns call for you to do just like 2 setup rounds, but yeah, I like the way it looks. I think it looks nice and finished, and it's just 1 layer of ribbing, which I like. Also, for the bind off, I can share a bit more about that. So the pattern calls for you to just bind off in pattern using a regular bind off, and I don't know why at first I was just like super shocked by it, because I'd been doing sewn bind offs for so long. Like basically as soon as I was learning to knit, I was doing sewn bind offs, because when I tried the regular bind offs previously, I just always bound off too tight, and I don't like how it made the fabric kind of bunch, and so I always did sewn bind offs or tubular bind offs. And so I was like, oh, maybe I should try to look for a different way to bind off, because this is in 3x2 rib, and I'm sure there is a way to do a sewn bind off in pattern for 3x1 rib, 3x2 rib, but I didn't try super hard, but I couldn't immediately figure out how, so I kind of gave up and looked for different ways of binding off. And I did see a tutorial for like an invisible bind off in rib, and the end result kind of looked like the last stitches were just looped on, like when you put live stitches on like a waist yarn, the bind off basically looked like that, where the bind off edge was like the waist yarn, and then there were just loops hanging over that. And I thought it looked a little bit funny in my opinion, and so alas, I just went back and bound off regularly in rib as the pattern calls for, but I did size up like 2 needle sizes. So I knitted this using 2.5 millimeter needles. I had to size down quite a bit to get gauge. I guess I am a loose knitter, which I didn't really know that I was, but lately I've had to size down needles to get gauge, so it is what it is. And for the bind off, I sized up 2 sizes, so I ended up binding off with a 3.5 millimeter needle. And I think the result is quite nice. It does stretch a little bit with the rib, and it doesn't look like super bulky or visible or anything, so I think, I'm pleased with the bind off. As I mentioned, I used 2.5 millimeter needles to knit this to meet gauge, and my interchangeable needle set only goes down to a 2.75 millimeter. So I shared in my last video that the 2.5 millimeter needles I get are something I use for sock knitting, and I like to use Magic Loop 40 inch knitting needles, fixed circulars, for knitting socks, colorwork socks. And so that's what I was using for this, but the 40 inch fixed circular was just a little bit too long to fit comfortably this in a circle, so I was doing Magic Loop on the body. But someone commented, I believe it was Stephanie, who suggested that I look into traveling loop, which I never tried before. So I looked into a couple of videos on how to do it, and then I immediately tried it, and oh my goodness, it's so much easier. I am so grateful for that suggestion. Basically, instead of in Magic Loop where you split the stitches into like half, so one half of the stitches are on one needle and the other half is on the other, for traveling loop, you pull the working needle like all the way out so that all of your stitches are attached either to your needle or like just all the stitches are kept together, and you just knit all the way through to the end, and you can pull on the cable to adjust a little bit if it's not fitting. So basically you only have to like switch, like readjust your needle every round versus every half a round. And I have found that it works better in some cases than others. So I think like for a larger circumference, like relatively larger circumference, it works, traveling loop works really well. But for really small circumferences, I think it's still a little bit easier for me to just do Magic Loop. So there's a circumstance for both, but I'm really glad that Stephanie suggested that I try traveling loop, and it really helped me get through this body on the needles that I had. When I finished knitting it, I tried it on, and of course, because it's rib, it was like super bodycon, like everything is cinched, and I wanted to make sure it blocks out so it's pretty relaxed. So I blocked out the body. I didn't try to be super aggressive with the blocking, but I think I was. I think I maybe was a little bit aggressive. I basically tried to make sure the rib at the bottom lined up straight, but maybe because my bind off edge was pretty loose, I ended up having to like stretch it quite a bit to make sure that it lines up on the bottom, or like lays flat according to the bottom bind off edge. What I did try to like purposely block out a little bit aggressively is the shoulder part in the back. So in the images, this looks like it cuts in pretty far. It just cuts in pretty far like this. And it's not necessarily like a bra friendly top. It also has a racer back, which I do kind of like, but again, not super bra friendly. And I wanted to see if I can block it out to be more bra friendly. So I purposely pulled the back and then the front just out a little bit more to like open this section in this way. And I think it worked. Like now it kind of looks just like a tank top rather than like a super cut in neck. And I kind of like that, but I kind of do like the way it was before as well. Like I have like a racer back bra where you can like cross the back straps and it doesn't really show if you're wearing a racer back style top, and I like that style. So I think I'll wear this as is for a bit, but if I were to wash it again, I think I'll try and maintain that racer back shape if it'll stretch back in, which I hope it does. I also think that I use like some pins to pin this out, and the edge became a little bit like lumpy because of how I stretched it. This is where I think I maybe was like a little aggressive in my blocking. I don't know if you can tell, but it's not a super straight edge. I'm gonna wear it as is for now, but next time I think I might try to not stretch it out as much. And I don't know, maybe it'll relax a little bit as I continue to wear it. I'm not sure if it'll happen, but I think things tend to go out of shape after it's blocked after a while, so we'll see. So yeah, I am really, really happy with this top. I think when I was first sharing it, everyone kind of helped me set expectations that this is a lot of knitting on really tiny needles. And I think because of that, I just was like not super in a rush to knit this at all. I just knitted on it, when I had some time to put in a couple of rows, I didn't have like marathon knitting trying to get through it or anything. And so because of that, I feel like this didn't take that much effort, or at least not like mental effort. So yeah, it was pretty nice. Although the small needles are a little bit harder on my hands, so I don't think I'm like racing to knit my next fingering weight ribbed camisole, but I would definitely be open to having one again in the future. So yeah, this was my twisted loop top. So those were my finished objects for the past couple of weeks, and now I'm on to whips. Like I said, I have 4 whips. So the first one is my Gioia Cardigan by Sandrine C, aka Quiet Hours. I hope I'm saying that correctly, by the way. Gioia, it's spelled Gioia. I'll put it in the description as well. I pronounced it Gioia because there was somebody in my elementary school who had a last name that was similar to that, and it was pronounced Gioia, so that's why I'm saying that. But if it's not right, feel free to let me know. It is a cardigan that has a saddle shoulder and a lace panel in the front. And last time I had only cast it on, like literally I only casted on the cast on stitches. But since then I have knitted much of the yoke. So you can see that it has these saddle shoulder panels, and then the sleeve increases, and then I've started this lace panel that has been really fun to knit actually, and it's pretty intuitive. It's all charted, and it has like maybe a 12 row repeat or something like that, so I do keep the chart in front of me at all times so that I can refer to it. I can't memorize it or anything, but it is pretty intuitive. There's a left panel and a right panel, and I really appreciate that. Of course they're just mirrors of each other, but because it's knitted flat, the pattern designer does provide 2 charts and tells you like which chart to knit at which end. So it's really nice to kind of have that spelled out for you. So I appreciate that level of detail. There's also short row shaping right underneath the neckline. And in fact, all of the shaping details in this pattern are really, really amazing. I've never knit a pattern with this many details in the shaping, and I think it'll turn out to be really beautiful. So some examples, the short row shaping at the back of the neck is one. And then for the saddle shoulder, that's another. Of course, after the saddle shoulder, there's the raglan increases. And I think this is called a compound raglan because it's not just a constant rate of increases all the way down. Sometimes you're only increasing for the sleeve, or only for the body, or for the body and sleeves, and then the increase rate also varies. So I think with this amount of shaping, the end results would look really, really nice, and I'm very excited to see how that turns out. As compared to my other saddle shoulder work in progress, which is the Terrazzo neck, I think that, or the Terrazzo sweater, I don't know why I always call it a neck. For that one, the raglan increases are just a constant rate of increases. And I think it works for that since it's a pretty boxy, like oversized sweater. But for this cardigan that's like got these lovely details, I'm very excited to see how this shapes up. I guess pun semi-intended there. And then it also has a continuous button band. It's basically like an I-cord button band, which I'd never done before, but it looks so dainty, and I really like the way that it's turning out. I am knitting this using the Juniper Moon Farms Harriet Fine, yes, in the color Via Blanca. The pattern originally calls for either lace plus fingering, so I think the sample images are knit using 1 strand of fingering weight wool and then 1 strand of lace weight mohair. And it also says you can use like a DK weight yarn. Hi, what's up? This yarn is 75% alpaca, 25% nylon. Again, I think it's meant to be used for shawls and things like that, but it is called like a light fingering weight, so I held it double, and I think it's getting me like somewhere between DK and worsted. It honestly feels like, to me, I don't know, maybe more like worsted. I'm sure it's just somewhere in the middle. The lady at the knitting store when I got this at the yarn store said that she thinks it would be DK, and of course, it may depend on like the gauge that you knit it at. That depends how dense the fabric is. Regardless, I'm getting like a 19.5 to 20-ish stitch gauge using 4mm needles, and it's a little bit bigger than what the pattern calls for, so I sized down 1 size. And I think for a while I wasn't totally sure how I felt about the fabric, so it definitely looks very nice. It's got this pretty nice halo, but not like super crazy, or not as halo-y as maybe a mohair, but it feels also like it's definitely very soft, but it feels like a little bit slippery. And I think I might just be like getting used to a new type of fiber. I never used, I think this type of fiber held double before. I don't know if it's the nylon content that makes it feel a little bit slippery, but yeah, I think it is growing on me though. At first I was like really dubious. Somebody in the comments at one point suggested that I consider holding it with a wool. Their reasoning was like it would have more structure that way. And I was thinking like, oh, well, I don't really need this cardigan to have a lot of structure. I'm okay with it being super drapey. But thinking of it now, I feel like holding it with a wool, like the Tropical Lane Ideale or something like that, might make it feel nicer. I don't know. I'm not sure that I'll rip it out to like try that, but just a thought. In terms of my knitting experience thus far, again, I have been just so engaged and having a lot of fun with the pattern. I think the thing that like troubled me, which is, you know, of course all on me and something I get into with some pieces that are like not just like a simple stockinette all over type of thing, is that like it's meant to be a piece that you pay a lot of attention to, and sometimes I try to kind of like multitask with it, like watching a show or whatever. And I think because of that, sometimes like you make mistakes or you get a little bit laissez-faire with like checking your stitch counts at the checkpoints. So for example, I had knitted up to a certain section. The pattern's divided into sections, and it's really nice that they tell you exactly how many stitches should be at each section after that round of increases. So like X number of stitches for the front pieces, X number of stitches for each sleeve, etc. So you can kind of count it up and make sure you're all set before moving to the next section. And I was doing that up until like section 4 or something, where I was like, I'm sure it's fine. And I knit at the next section, which was like maybe 2 inches or so. And then I realized that my stitch counts were off because I misread the instructions for the previous section. The pattern itself was really clear. It was one of those things like, you know, the pattern would say something like repeat rows 1 and 2 for, let's just say 15 times. And I had just knitted 15 rows, so I didn't do it as many times as I should have. I feel like that's a very common pitfall, but I had like not knitted on this for a while and I was picking it back up and just didn't really know where I left off. So that was kind of one snafu that I hit. So I frogged back. Of course, it's always like, oh, I have to frog back. And at first I tried to keep the 2 strands separate, like wound each strand into its own ball. But let's just say that was not the first time I had to frog back like a huge section. I realized that was such a pain to separate strands. So I ended up just making like a smaller ball with the 2 strands still wound together, and that was a lot easier. But anyway, I frogged back, put the stitches back on the needle, which is also, you know, kind of a pain. And then I re-knitted it, and I just like kept making mistakes for a while. I think this happens to me sometimes where if I've had to frog back, I subconsciously feel like I have to catch up. And I say subconsciously because I don't think that I consciously make a decision to say like, okay, hurry, you have to hurry. I just feel like I naturally gravitate towards wanting to hurry to like get back to where I was before. And of course, like sometimes, many times, the more you rush, the more you like mess up and just end up having to redo things and be even slower compared to if you just, you know, slow down and did things slowly in the first place. I think as someone who can be a little bit impatient, I fall into that sometimes, and I think I fell into that with this piece. So yeah, that was just, after that I was like, okay, reminder to just like take it slow. And then the other thing I did that was really, really silly was I was, you know, knitting and, you know, examining my work a couple of rows back, and I was like, oh, weird, like there's a pretty big hole a couple rows back. And so let me just fix that. So I like laddered back, and so I, you know, dropped some stitches intentionally to re-knit it. And it was near like the button band area, so there's a lot of lace, and it was a little bit tricky for me to do with like appropriate tension. And so anyway, I did that, fixed it, and then I was like, wait a second, that hole was a buttonhole that I intentionally put there. So basically I had to go back and add the buttonhole back in, which was a total waste of time. This took me actually quite a while to do, because I was like, oh, why is there so much extra yarn? Like, or maybe it was not enough yarn, I don't know. Anyway, my tension was all whack. So then I realized it was a buttonhole, I had to put it back. And then for some reason, this buttonhole just looks enormous compared to this one up here. So there's another buttonhole up here, and it's so much smaller than this one. So part of me is like kind of wanting to go back and fix it. Part of me is like, maybe I'll just sew it back up a little bit. But then I was looking at this again this morning and I realized I have a dropped stitch over here. So I don't know. I think this was also in that phase of me like either not paying much attention or what have you. So anyway, I think I'm going to put this down for a little bit while I work on another WIP that is higher priority that I'll explain. And after that, see if I want to just like fix it or to just carry on. Yeah, honestly, like there really is no rush with this piece. I originally wanted to have it as a spring piece, but the fabric is honestly like pretty thick and it's already May. By the time I finish it, it'll probably be the summer, and I definitely don't want to be wearing this in a Virginia summer. So I think this will more come in handy in like the fall or winter times. So yeah, I don't need to finish it this season, so I think I'll just take my time with it. And again, such a lovely pattern, really gorgeous design, and really, really clearly written. I would highly recommend this pattern. Okay, so the next WIP, which is my high priority WIP, and the reason it's a high priority WIP is that I'm making it for a very exciting event. I'm going to the Taylor Swift Eras Tour, and I'm extremely excited. I really wanted to make something that I can wear to the event, like hand make something. I think that would be just a fun thing that I would very much enjoy doing. And so I was trying to brainstorm like what I wanted to make. Like I wanted it to be thematic, but of course the Eras Tour is like all of her eras and her albums. And so as a fan of her entire discography, I had a lot of options. And if you're interested in what other options I considered, let me know, and I'm happy to talk more about that maybe in my next episode. But the piece I decided to go with is inspired by her Lavender Haze song on her Midnight's album. So it looks pretty anticlimactic right now because of the way it is. But anyway, it looks kind of like this. It's going to be, just like an airy tee. It's lavender. It's like basically sheer. It's very hazy. So yep, Lavender Haze. This is basically the Ghost Whisperer top by Park Williams. I'm sure many of you have seen that before. I am actually following the pattern for the Drinks on the Patio crop by ShanaKay Salmon. And if you've seen that top, you'd be like, what the heck? This is not the same top at all. And you're right. That top is just like a worsted weight tank top or Aran weight tank top, I think. Anyway, the reason I am doing this is I've had the Drinks on the Patio crop in my pattern library for a while now, and I mentioned it in my 2023 knitting plans, and I might still knit it, and I guess in a way I am already knitting it with this version of it, but I basically wanted to do that because I wanted to see if I can freehand a pattern. The reason is that before I started knitting, I used to crochet, and when I was crocheting garments, I very often freehanded garments without using a pattern, and for me, like, freehanding with crochet felt pretty intuitive. I don't know why, maybe because like you can remove the needle and take a look at the fabric, or not the needle, remove the hook and take a look at the fabric and kind of restart kind of wherever, although of course that results in a bunch of ends to weave in. But anyway, when I started knitting, first I was just a little bit newer to the craft. It didn't seem like as intuitive how you would go about shaping when you have all those stitches on a needle. And there were just so many knitting patterns out there that I never really felt the need to freehand anything because there were so many patterns for basically many of the tops that I liked. Whereas for crocheting, I think I did a lot of like looking for inspiration in commercial tops or on Pinterest and then trying to replicate that on my own, which meant I had to figure out the shaping. But now I've had more experience knitting, and I kind of wanted to see what it would be like to kind of freehand something. And I figured a top like this would be pretty forgiving as a first thing to try because like it's a pretty large gauge, so it's not the most time consuming type of knit, and it is like doesn't have that much shaping. Like it's still pretty boxy and loose, so it's pretty forgiving, and also it's such an open gauge that I feel like I can block it into whatever shape I need it to be, so it's a little bit, again, forgiving in that sense. And I also didn't want to start like purely from scratch. So I was looking at the Ghost Whisperer top, and I feel like, you know, you need to essentially first knit a tank top and then add sleeves. And the shape of the tank top portion looked really similar to the Drinks on the Patio crop. So I figured I'd start there. I had to like adjust a little bit with stitch counts and things like that. But I basically followed that construction process in which you knit bottom up. So you start at the bottom, and then you knit shaping for the front and back panels. Then you seam at the shoulders using a 3-needle bind off, which was my first time doing that. It sounded complicated, but I was happy to find that it was pretty simple. And I ended up doing a Jenny surprisingly stretchy 3-needle bind off, which just basically means like I added a yarn over before binding off the way you would do a regular Jenny surprisingly stretchy bind off, because I had found that this mohair, like it's too easy to bind off tightly, and then it would just cinch too much, and I didn't want that. So the stretch really just helps it stay loose for me, and I can show you what it looks like. Here we go. Here is, can you see that? Here is the shoulder seam, like right along here. I think it looks pretty neat, and of course there's like a small ridge on the back. I think normally it wouldn't be super obvious, but because this is such an open gauge, you can kind of see it, but it looks pretty nice, right? It was a nice technique that I learned. And then I picked up for the neck. At first the neck was like freaking enormous, but then I added the I-cord. And of course, one of the downsides of not having like a proper pattern is you have to experiment a little bit. So at first I picked up using like too small a needle, and the I-cord was so small that it was basically like the size of a sleeve cuff, and I was like, there's no way this would go over my head. So I had to, you know, like frog that, and frogging mohair of course is not the most fun experience in the world, although I kind of just like ended up ripping off the applied I-cord by like breaking the pickup edge, because frogging mohair, man, just not fun. So I reknitted that, and it's looking a lot better, and I'm now at the point of picking up the stitches for the sleeves. And yeah, it's I feel like knitting this is definitely, let's just say, not a process knit. Knitting this mohair using like large freaking metal needles is kind of a pain. It's pretty slippery, the stitches fall off pretty easily, and it's kind of difficult to get into the stitches sometimes. I know it could be improved if I had like a bamboo needle or wooden needle or something like that, but I don't have one. I don't think I'll need like a 6mm bamboo needle for anything else. So I didn't want to get a needle just for this. Oops. Did I? Okay. I thought that all my sleeve stitches slipped off, but it didn't. Thank goodness. So yeah, it's coming along. I need to finish this like ASAP because the concert is coming up and I need it done. So yeah. In terms of the craftsmanship, I feel like, again, because this yarn is like so sticky, I think this is where I joined the shoulders with a cast on edge. There's just like this big hole. I'm going to try and fix it with duplicative stitching, and I hope it like is relatively seamless. Like this part is actually right under, like right in the front neckline. So I don't want like a gigantic hole here. So I'm going to try and fix it, but yeah, it's very, it feels like very floppy, and I know that's the way it's meant to be. So the only other thing that I'll have to see how it goes is at the bottom. So it was knit bottom up, so I cast it on at first, and I cast it on using German twisted cast on, thinking like, oh, this will give me some stretch. And I also used, I think, 1 or 2 sizes up for the needle. But as you can see, it's still just a little too tight. So I don't know if you can tell, like it's kind of cinching in a little bit at the bottom as opposed to going straight down. I kind of hoped it would flare out a little bit, but it's definitely cinching in. I want to finish the top, finish the sleeves, and see if that bothers me or not. If it bothers me, I guess I could just cut and graft like a new bottom section where I do a much looser cast on. Or I can consider whether you can just knit in the opposite direction starting from the bottom, but I feel like it would offset the stitches and that might look weird, so I might have to experiment with that. Or I'll just like let it be because I don't have that much more time to finish it, and I'd really like to. So at this point, I should disclaim, like, I think I'm a realist to pessimist in terms of my outlook. So at this point, I'm still fully like mentally preparing for this not to work out. Like maybe it'll be too difficult to style, or maybe it just doesn't work out. And if that's the case, like I'll wear something else. At the end of the day, I'm just really excited to go to the concert. Like what I'm wearing is secondary to having a good experience, I think. But yeah, I will try my hardest to finish this because I think it would be nice to wear something like that. Oh, and the yarn that I use for this is Lang Yarn's Lace. Here's the second skein. I got 2 skeins, and so far for the body and like a little bit of one sleeve, I've used not even 1 full skein, so it doesn't consume a lot of yarn at all. And this mohair is very soft. I had shared previously that I have sensitive skin, and I find like a lot of mohair is itchy just, you know, by like touching the skein to my skin. But this one is very, very soft. Yeah, I think I'll definitely wear something under this, obviously. It's so sheer. And yeah, I still feel like there's some minor prickle, but it's not very uncomfortable to me. Or at least I hope. You never really know until you've worn it for a while, so we'll see. Okay, so my next whip you've seen before. It's kind of a long-term whip. It is my Terrazzo sweater by PetiteKnit. It's basically like I wanted a crew neck sweatshirt, and at the time of planning this, I thought I wanted to make the sweater number 23, but I really wanted to try a saddle shoulder construction. Before this, I had never done a saddle shoulder before. After this, I cast it on the Gioia, so I've now done it, I guess, twice. But yeah, I found that this was basically like a saddle shoulder sweater, and I figured I'd just fold it down, like fold down the collar to be a double folded crew neck versus the big turtleneck. That's part of the pattern. Since I shared this, others have also shared many other saddle shoulder sweaters. Like I think someone suggested the office sweater. So I guess, yeah, this is not the only saddle shoulder sweater if this is like the thing that you're looking for. But yeah, it's what I am knitting now. It'll be hopefully just like a very staple, no frills type of sweatshirt type of sweater. And since last episode, I've just knitted a lot of the body. I think before I was maybe like up to here on the body, and now I'm all the way here. I did some measuring, and I think I just need like a centimeter or 2 before I want to start knitting the ribbing. I was at first debating like making a really long rib the way that the Frankie sweater, the Santa's Garden Frankie sweater looks, but I think I opted to end up making a more classic looking sweater. I still like the long ribbing look, but maybe with like a different yarn, different color type of thing. So yes, mostly, like I said, this is a long-term whip. I'm not actually sure if I said that, but it is. I just wanted something to knit stockinette in the round when I'm watching things. So like when I'm watching TV with my partner, or when actually recently a couple of friends and me and my partner, we've been watching The Last of Us together. So I've been so most of this progress has been knit while watching The Last of Us, which is an incredible show on HBO, and has Pedro Pascal in it. I mean, I'm sure everyone has heard of this show already, but if you have not seen it, I highly recommend. I know I'm already kind of late to the party. It is such a good show, and I have really enjoyed knitting this while watching it because like the fabric the yarn is really satisfying to hold and knit, and it's like pretty easy to knit without looking as well. This is the Filcolana Peruvian Highland wool in the color Fisherman Blue. So yeah, I've actually begun to like associate the sweater with The Last of Us, which I'm not complaining about because it's such a good show. So it does use the same needles as my Gioia cardigan, so I kind of switch between the two. Sometimes I'll put the stoppers on here because I was knitting actively on the Gioia cardigan, but if I'm going to go see the show with my friends, or I'll just switch the needles onto here. That has not been too bad. So yeah, not much else to say on this. I obviously don't need to finish it anytime soon because it's such a thick, like winter-y sweater. The last whip that I have is something I just casted on 2 weeks ago. Basically, I was going up to New York City to visit my best friend for her birthday, and then right after that, I went on a work trip, so like directly from there, and so I wanted a small portable project to knit on that's easy for travel, and I chose to knit socks. So I've finished one sock already. I finished this on the trip. In fact, I casted on the other one on the plane home from my work trip portion of my trip. So this is knit using the Smooshy, or the Dream in Color Smooshy yarn. I got a sock kit, and the colors are Torchwood for the contrast color, which is this beautiful tonal, like light brown. And then this color, which is so gorgeous, I believe it's called Mercado Lights. It's got like oranges and reds and yellows, like really vivid colors. And the pattern that I followed is like really kind of 3 patterns. So I did this toe up, which is, I used the trusty toe up sock pattern by Tanis Lavelli. But for the heel, I did the Fish Lips Kiss heel. And then I added a pattern as well, which is basically a 2x1 broken rib. It's inspired by the Broken Record socks, but I think that's like 3x1 broken rib. I could be wrong though. I think it's 3x1 broken rib. It's a free pattern, so yeah. I had knit something very, very similar that I showed in my previous video with the same sock kit with basically the same pattern, except I think I did 3x1 broken rib as opposed to 2x1. I knitted that pair for myself in this like pinky red color, but I had gotten both sock kits at the same time, and I knew that these are kind of like my boyfriend's colors, so I decided to knit a pair of socks for him. And I think at first, when I had knitted just this part, he made a comment like, wow, it's like having the sun on my feet, which I think is a good thing. And then I think with the brown contrast color, he did mention it looks a little bit more autumnal, but I think he still likes that, I hope. So yeah, I followed the instructions from the Fish Lips Kiss heel to make a template for my partner's foot. So I made this before for another pair of socks that I knitted him. And so I brought this with me on my trip so I could try the sock on to make sure that it fits. And I think that was a good call, partly because something that I did was, I packed my socks, packed my needles, and went on my trip. And I casted on initially 72 stitches because that's what I used from the last pair of socks I made for my boyfriend that fit really nicely. And then I knitted the toe, I knitted a little bit of the foot, and I tried it on this template, and it was just so loose. And so I was like, okay, weird, maybe I'm knitting looser. So I did a 64 stitch sock. And so like having this was helpful just to check that the fit is as expected, and also kind of has a line that I had previously calculated that tells me where to start the heel. But basically, after I had casted on, like finished one sock, and I was casting on the second sock, like in the airport or maybe sometime during my work trip, I can't remember, I realized that I was using 2.75 millimeter needles as opposed to the 2.25 millimeter needles that I typically use. So I think that explains why the gauge was so much bigger and why I had to do a 64 stitch sock for my boyfriend. And I got a little bit worried because obviously like the fabric will be a little bit looser, and so I hope that it wouldn't adversely affect how well it wears. Looking at the fabric itself, like it's not super open. Like I don't think it's, obviously problematic, but compared to like some of the other socks that I've knit, it is a little bit looser. So I don't know. I think all I can do is just hope for the best. I don't think he'll necessarily wear these in shoes. So yeah, I hope they fit, and I guess I can learn to darn socks, I guess, if there was any problems with this. But yes, my second sock is kind of early days. I mean, I didn't really knit on this at all after I came back from my trip. I have some other things that I've been focusing on, and I think I'll just continue to use this as like a portable travel project. It's currently on waste yarn because I think I was swatching for something with the 2.75 millimeter needle. So this is in progress. I think I'll aim to give this to him for Christmas maybe. So really ahead of the game on my Christmas sock knitting, I suppose. I would consider giving it to him for his birthday, but his birthday's in the summer, and I feel like why would you want a pair of wool socks in the summer? But it's kind of late summer, so I guess it's close enough to fall that maybe it would be appropriate. I don't know. We'll see how far I get with this, and then I'll decide. Okay, so that's it with my whips, and on to acquisitions. The first thing I wanted to share is not yarn, but it is a kind gift from the BenQ team, and it is a lamp. So I have the empty box here. I'll show you the lamp in a minute. It's a very large box, but it's basically the e-reading lamp. They reached out and asked if I would be interested in receiving the lamp to share my honest review on my channel. And I looked into the lamp and thought that it was super cool and that I would really love to try it out. My boyfriend also saw the shape of it and was like, whoa, that looks so cool. And I definitely agree. Some of the features of the lamp is that it has like that bar on top, so it has even direct lighting, like overhead lighting on whatever's on your table. So really helpful for crafting where you don't just have like a lamp radiating from one side and your hand can cover the shadows or anything like that. I think especially for working with black yarn, having a light like that is super, super handy. I haven't knit with any black yarn, but when I was crocheting with black yarn, it just is like looking into a black hole. You really can't see anything. And at one point I tried to like point a ring light onto whatever I was working on, but it still casted like shadows and it was really harsh light, and it was basically a struggle to crochet with black yarn without a good light source unless you're in like the broad daylight. So I'm very grateful to be having that. It also gets really bright. It says that the recommended lighting levels for mechanical workshops is 1,000 lux, and this light goes up to 1,600 lux. So it's brighter than what's needed for like mechanical workrooms. And it also has like a automatic sensor. So I'll show you in a little clip, but you can like use the knob to adjust the brightness, or you can use like one of two auto dimming modes that detects how bright it needs to be and then it does that for you. So I'll show you a clip of me like trying out the lamp so you can see. Okay, so here is the lamp. It has two joints, one over here and one over here, so you can adjust the height. And to turn it on, you just have to tap this little ring. So I don't know if you can tell, it just turned on. And also you can adjust the brightness using this knob. So I don't know if you can tell, it just got brighter. So yes, overall, I think it's really nice build quality. Like, it's a very heavy lamp. The stand itself is very heavy. And in fact, it has a warning, like, don't drop it on your foot because, you know, that would hurt, I think. And all of the buttons and everything, like, move really smoothly. The knob turns really nicely. So it is kind of a splurge, but I have been really impressed by the features. Again, the lamp was kindly gifted to me, but all of my opinions are my own. So wanted to share that with you all. My second acquisition is also not yarn, but it's also not yarn, but yarn adjacent. I finally went for these comb blockers, knit blockers. So this is the Knitter's Pride rainbow version. So I've already taken them out, so they're not super neat, but they have like these pins on a block, so it's a lot easier to just like pin straight edges. I had previously been using those like individual pins that came with my blocking board set, but it just takes forever to do, and then it also doesn't like, it's hard to keep it all straight. So this saved a lot of time when I was blocking my twisted loop top. This I purchased with my own money, just to clarify that. I do feel like one set wasn't quite enough. It has 12 blockers with 8 pins and 8 blockers with 4 pins, but to go like all the way around the rib top, I needed to supplement with some of those individual pins. And I think those like individual pins are what caused like the uneven edges that I showed when I was showing my twisted loop top. So I think at some point it might be nice to have another set, but I think for now, like one is sufficient. It's very difficult to put it back in. So let me try and line this up. Oh, it's because it doesn't belong there. It belongs here. There was no empty spot, so yeah, I think overall, I think this is a pretty helpful investment and glad to have it. All right, so that's it for today. I did place an order with Wool & Company, but it hasn't arrived, so I'll share that when it gets here, probably my next episode. And so that's a wrap for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, I would appreciate if you consider giving it a like or subscribing if you haven't already. And thanks for watching. Thanks for being here, and I hope to see you again in the next one. Bye, everyone.